This is a 2001 Pontiac Sunfire with a 2.2 in it. It has broken the timing chain. And shouldn't have bent the valves. But anything's possible. The first thing I want to do is raise the car out and get this passenger side wheel off and take any plastic and weigh the motor off of it so I can get access to the crankshaft dampener and accessory drive belt tensioner and the tensioner bolt holding the tensioner to the engine. The drive belt will have to come off and the tensioner arm. And the power steering pump will have to come loose and set back out of the way. Removing 3 bolts from the crank dampener pulley. Removing the center crank bolt from the hub. And procedures call for removing the oil pan, but you can get around removing the oil pan. I took the 21mm lug nuts off, removed the wheel, stuck one lug nut back on to keep the rotor from flopping around and getting rust down in behind it. This is an opportune time to push on your spindle and make sure the tie rod ends are in good shape. Lower ball joints, brake lines. I run a jack in behind the front wheel, raise it up on the subframe, set a jack stand underneath the body, and begin loosening these 7mm. Took that one out. Take these 3 loose here and one out on top. And I have to go to the underside and unclip the ABS harness from these connectors sticking through the plastic. Quick word about this plastic. You have to take the inner fender bolts, 3 of them out as it curves around, and then prop it over the spindle. If the original bolts are still in this, plus there's one plastic pin right behind the computer and a wire harness still clipped on. Just be careful, your computer, gotta pop that plastic pin out. Computer wires. It's very dirty in here, so I keep my face out from underneath all this plastic when I'm taking it loose, because everything that's been run over by this car comes out of here when you start moving this stuff around. And your eyes are the target. Okay, I've got access to this very grungy area. I have the tensioner arm, the dampener pulley, and engine mount. So let's go ahead and rather than break up the fancy stuff, let's pry this tensioner pulley down with a screwdriver. And slip the belt off of there. Oh, it's like this. Somebody's put an aftermarket water pump on here and it's already got a problem. We'll go ahead and zap this crankshaft hub bolt out. I'm going to go ahead and take the 3 bolts off of the crankshaft pulley. I went ahead and pulled the oil pan drain plug. It's a 15mm. I've moved the jack into position underneath the oil pan with a softwood spacer beside the oil drain in line with the bottom of the oil pan to hold the motor up. And I'll set a jack stand over here as a backup in case something happens to the jack. I've took the weight off the motor and go on top and take the engine mount loose. First thing I'm going to do is set a 10mm on this overflow tank hold down bolt and take the hold down bolt out. And there's a bracket on top of it, kind of a line support. And just stand that up, get this 15mm underneath here. Be careful with the air conditioner line. And this short nut. Switch into a deep well. Put that up there. I got two 13s in the center here, and take the 15s out, which is fine with me. More room to deal with the power steering pump again. Two more 15s. Now 2 15s on top. Make sure the weight's taken off the motor here. I've got it sitting on a jack. I'll break the back one loose and thread it back down a little bit, and break this front one loose. Let the motor settle a little bit. Start dropping some. Take some more weight off of it. Motor's fully sitting on the jack right now, so make sure no fingers are in the way, and yeah, it won't be. Slip that mount out of there. Take these two 13mm out. Once these two bolts are out, I'll slip this mount out. A rubber piece. Just stick it back in there. There's two halves of that. Pull this mount up out of there. Okay, got a good view of everything done in there. Since this one has cruise control on it, I'm going to go ahead and zap these two nuts off of the strut tower and plug it and just kind of get it out of the way. looks good. I'm going to jack the motor up so I can get access to the power steering pump bolts and take those out. When I raise the motor up, I'm going to set it on a jack stand because fingers will be in between it and the body, and if something happened to the jack, it's a good way to lose them. Okay, the engine's actually resting on the jack stand via the cradle mount underneath the oil pan. There's 3 bolts in the front of the power steering pump. So one at 5 o'clock, one at about 2 o'clock, and one at about 9 o'clock, 9 o'clock. 13 millimeters. I'll take those loose and remove them. And remove one 13 millimeter on the bottom back side of the power steering pump. That back bolt will have to be reached up from underneath and turned out right above the oil filter and just below the return rubber hose coming off the pump. The nipple on that return hose is plastic. Be sure not to break it off by pushing around on the return hose. Yep, that's the jewel. Just reached over in front of the strut tower and up the back of the motor and got that out. Putting it back in is the fun part. Okay, I just walked the power steering pump up a little bit to get some clearance to the top of the cover. And let the motor down and take that tension arm off. 15 millimeter bolt on it. Take a jack stand out from underneath of it. Now that the motor is down, I got access to the bolt pretty easy. Holds the tension arm on. Just go ahead and undo it, pull it out of there. I'll stick a screwdriver between that bolt and the body and help the motor down a little further to get the bolt out past the body. I went ahead and pulled this mount bolt out of this support bracket. Pretty long, passes through there. But in the ballpark now, I'll go ahead and put a puller and pull this dampener hub off. I suppose you can use a 3-jawed puller if you want to pull that off. I just used a standard GM dampener puller to do it. I'm going to knock some of the crud off from around the cover area. And then take these 10 millimeter nuts off the front of the oil pan. Remove the 8 millimeter or 5/16 headed bolts around the perimeter of the cover. Whichever socket you want to use, they will both fit either one. Got all the bolts out of the cover and the 2 nuts off the oil pan. Now these studs are stuck into the cover. They've got E heads on them, but they'll twist off if you try to take them loose. And the cover is going to be stuck between this stud and the pan and these 2 dowel pins on either side. get a pry bar in here and work on this tensioner arm extension and pry the cover forward. I get it off these dowel pins and then lift it up enough to seal, probably hit the crank a little bit, lift enough and tilt it forward to get the cover out of there. That's going to get a new seal put in it anyway. This one's hard as a rock. Once you get clear of the dowel pins, you can lift up on the cover. Just take your time and don't bend the oil pan ears. You have to work on working both sides up until the stud's clear. Just real easy. Front stud's clear. Some of the damaged timing chain goodies inside is keeping this cover bound up, so I'm going to go ahead and put an E socket on there and break that off. Give me just enough room. Looks like an E5, and shear the top of this off. So it shortened it a little bit. And then go ahead and pry that up if I have to, and take this bolt loosen oil pan and tilt the oil pan down just a little bit on the end. I did have to loosen that back oil pan bolt up a little bit, and just kind of got on both sides with a couple of flat screwdrivers and work this thing out of there. And there's this. That's not. Chain's broke. Looks like most of the pieces are still up here. I'll have to stick a camera down in there and see if any chunks. There's a piece. They're in the oil pan. Use a magnet to fish them out. A lot of kind of silver looking metal here and there, and there's the timing cover gasket. This rubber and torn. It's hard. Some plastic. Take a metal hook and fish that out of there. Now, since I'm showing the route for taking the timing cover off without removing the oil pan, these studs, you could have went ahead and put an E5 socket on it and sheared them off, and makes it a little easier to get it up out of there. But they'll have to be removed and standard bolts put back in it. Standard 10mm headed bolts to get this back in there with the oil pan on it. Just take them out. Clean this cover up. that's all they are, is a Loctite in double threaded stud. Now it's just a regular 10mm threaded hole that you can put a bolt through. Once you get these studs out of the way, then you can just slide the cover on the dowel pins while pushing down on the oil pan, and snug the just barely snug the timing cover bolts down, then tighten these down, then tighten the timing cover bolts on down. I've cleaned some of the mess out of there while the motor's tilted down on this side. I'm going to go ahead and take that cam bolt out. It has a 24mm. And my recommendation is to get a screwdriver in through one of the cam slots and down past the cam hold down plate, right through that slot there, and keep the cam from rotating while you break it loose. As a general rule, this keyway will be pointing up at 12 o'clock. We'll put number 1 cylinder in top dead center, and this divot, that tooth, will be lined up with that notch on the tensioner plate when it's on top dead center. I've got it turned back a couple of teeth. I'm going to go ahead and take a 24mm and ratchet and rotate that hole around to this tooth before I pop the bolt loose in the middle. It's not necessarily a valve bender, but I don't want to encourage a problem, so I dropped the piston back a little bit. Easy enough. Got the camshaft in lineup position. That's where the keyway pin sticks up, ends up at about 2 o'clock, and then the crank wheel, the key will be at 12 o'clock. But it's the marks on the sprocket that actually determine the timing positions. I'm going to take a T40 Torx bit. Take that T40, loosen the tensioner bracket, and an 11mm. Take that bolt out. Pull that, what's left of the tensioner bracket, out of there. Do not get those two fasteners mixed up. The shaved head on the Torx bit allows clearance for the chain to run up around the cam sprocket, and the other bolt, it doesn't matter. Now I need to put a gear puller onto this crankshaft sprocket and pull it off. These sprocket teeth are hammered, and both the sprockets need replaced because of their reduced diameter from the high mileage on this car, and it'll cause extra slack in the chain. I'm just using a cheap GM dampener puller with some skinny arms to pull it off. It's kind of on there, but not enough where you could pull it off, but it needs some help. And that's it. Stuffed a rag down in between the main bearing cap and the oil pan to seal off the oil pan from this area. I took some carb cleaner and started degreasing the face of the cover sealing area and washing any metal flakes down to this rag. I'm not really focusing on the bearings, like try not to clean out the oil around the cam or crankshaft main bearings. Just wash whatever metal flake I see down onto this rag and try to knock off some of the crud around the cover face. Just put your finger up in that return hole up there and drag out any pieces that might be in there. I've pulled the rag out and I run about 1.25 of gasoline through a funnel to wash debris out into the bottom of the pan. The gasoline is really the best at destabilizing the carbon. It's tying all that stuff together, and it's economical, but it really does a good job of degreasing this type of carbon. Just let that set a few hours and drain it, and then flush it again. Gasoline will do well to decarbonize this timing cover as well. Just leave it set in some of it. Just be careful around gasoline, as it is super flammable. It's what the car runs on.